as Lauren said, my name is Nellis, and I'm really grateful to be here today to speak to you for the second time. Thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. So as we get started, I want you all to take a moment and to put your feet on the ground, maybe feet flat on the ground, your hands in your lap, and close your eyes. And I want you to think about a time when you wanted something so bad. When you desperately wanted something. You couldn't get it out of your mind because you just wanted it so darn bad. Think about that time. Okay, go ahead and open your eyes. Let's go to the first slide. For many of us, we might have been thinking about a time when we were a child. When we were just a kid, maybe it was Christmas time, maybe it was the Women's World Cup, maybe it was something in particular that you wanted as a child. For me, I think about when I was 6 or 7 years old and I would be out fishing with my family. And for those who don't recognize what this image is, it's a bobber. It's a fishing bobber. So when you go fishing, you cast your line, and this bobber essentially is attached to your line. And when that giant trout comes by and bites on that worm at the end of the hook, that bobber actually goes down. It bobs, thus the name bobber. And it goes down. And I remember being 6 or 7 years old and just watching that bobber, just staring at it. I was just so darn certain that if I stared at it long enough, that bobber would bob. It would go down because I wanted to fish so bad. And I think about, as I think about other things. I think about it's Sunday night, and you're a little kid, and it starts snowing here in Colorado. And you're just hoping that it's going to snow all night long. That you're going to wake up and you can't even open your door because the snow is piled up against it, and there's no chance that any school in Denver would ever consider opening. That's the type of thing. I think about as I grew a little bit older, and I would go hunting with my dad and my brothers, and I would scurry on up my deer stand, my blaze orange, and I'd be sitting there before the sun came up, and have my gun in my lap, and I'd be listening, and I'd be waiting to hear a twig crack or something to come walking through the forest, just, a big 7-point bull walking through the meadow broadside 30 yards away. I just wanted it so bad. I think about in college as I got a little bit older, and I'd be driving home from a road trip on Sunday night, car full of way too many people in the car, trying to get back so that we can make it to class on Monday morning. 15 miles between here and campus, not a gas station in sight, and you notice that your gas is just a little too low. You're going, oh, I really hope this gas can make it all the way back to campus. And I think about the last 2 years where my wife and I have been wanting a baby for so very long. And we've been hoping and praying for a baby. The emotional roller coaster of every time we tried and it didn't work. And how badly we wanted it. I'm proud to say that I'm actually 5 months pregnant, which is really exciting. We should be expecting a little baby in early November. And I go through all of that because I think about, we all know how to pray. When you were thinking about the things that you were thinking about, you might have been thinking about not just hoping for them. At 6 years old, maybe even younger, you know how to pray. You know how to pray really hard for something that you just so desperately want. It comes so naturally to us. Praying for that bobber to drop. Praying for that gas tank to make it. Praying for a baby. Praying really hard. When was the last time that we wanted something so bad out of selfless desire for something greater than ourselves? That we wanted to help, that we would be persistent in even the most dire of circumstances. Most of us this week are probably getting prepared to go out and to celebrate the 4th of July holiday and to celebrate the freedoms that this country offers. And around this time, I start to think about different things. I think about 4 women 4 women from a group called No Más Muertes, No More Deaths. And it's a group that's actually made up of community and faith-based organizers and leaders who are sick and tired and disappointed in the U.S. immigration policy that we have in place and how the U.S. treats immigrants today. I can actually resonate with this. I empathize with this. I think about just a couple of weeks ago, there was a report that came out that the U.S. has actually put 60,000 children in U.S. custody in the last 40 days. It was one of those things where I had to actually look it up. Is this 6,000? No, 60,000 children in 40 days. And this group, No Más Muertes, and these 4 women are just so disappointed in how the U.S. is treating migrant families. They actually traveled into the Sonoran Desert. This is a picture of the Sonoran Desert. So the Sonoran Desert is actually, it's about an 80-mile stretch across the U.S.-Mexico border. It's a pretty fatal desert, lethal conditions, 80 miles of desert, and the temperatures of the desert actually get up to 115 degrees. And these women, these 4 women from this organization, traveled out into the desert. Go ahead and go to the next slide. To leave jugs of water in the desert for the people who are trying to cross over to seek a better life. And they left jugs of water in the desert this last year. And I feel like we might have a couple of people who speak Spanish here, maybe. Can someone translate what the jug of water says? If my Spanish is correct, I think it's be strong or strength, my friends. And these women traveled out to actually leave these jugs of water in the desert. You see, they were willing to go out in even the direst of circumstances to risk their own arrest because it's not actually legal to leave jugs of water in the desert. They were willing to go out there to risk arrest, to risk their own lives traveling through such a torturous desert. And they were being persistent even in the face of knowing that people like this man with the U.S. Border Service, would actually go out there, find the jugs of water, and literally just dump them out right there, denying the humanitarian relief that these 4 women were trying to provide to give people some hope. These 4 women were actually convicted this year of a crime. They were convicted of trespass onto a refuge, and they were convicted of abandonment of property. Women who wanted to provide help to people who needed it most, to people like Oscar and Valeria. How many folks heard about that this week in the news? A father and a daughter traveled literally over 1,000 miles to try to cross into the U.S. for a better life. And they died along the way, trying to seek that better life, trying to seek something greater. They actually took their last breaths clutching on to one another. And I wish I could say that that were an isolated incident, that it was just kind of a one-time thing and it doesn't happen, but it does. It happens all the time. Just a couple of months ago, 4 people were found near Brownsville, Texas, 3 of them young children, and 1 a woman in her early 20s. Just a couple of weeks ago, 10-month-old boy, his body was found near the Rio Grande. It's not a one-time incident. You see, these 4 women believed in something. Go to that next slide. They believed in something. They had faith in humanity. They acted by leaving jugs of water out in the middle of desert. Even in the most dire of circumstances, they had faith, they had prayer, and they were persistent to act no matter what the odds were. That is actually the story of Elijah. Elijah's kind of a cool person to think about in the Bible. This is the story of Elijah. You see, he was a man of faith who was invested in prayer and persistent to act on faith. So let me set the stage for you. We've been talking about this for the last few weeks. Let me set the stage for you. It's the book of 1 Kings. King Ahab is king. He's the ruler of Israel. And he's led the people of Israel to begin worshiping the gods of Baal and Asherah. Just for reference, the religious practices of Baal in particular were harmful to the people of Israel, specifically for children. Baal was known as the god of fertility, but most importantly, he was known as the god of rain. And then you have Elijah. You have Elijah, who's this prophet who prophesies of drought. In fact, in 1 Kings chapter 17, verse 1, Elijah actually goes to Ahab, King Ahab. And he says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." Talk about an offense to King Ahab. Talk about an offense to King Ahab. To the king who actually led the people of Israel to worship this God of rain, and you are there saying, "In my God's name, there's not going to be a drop of rain." There's just not going to be. So one day, so Elijah actually had to go into hiding. He went into hiding for 3 years because Ahab didn't like Elijah going out there and prophesying of drought. In fact, Ahab went into hiding for 3 years until God came to Ahab and said, God came to Elijah and said, "Elijah, I'm going to bring rain, and I need you to come out, and I need you to go tell Ahab." And so Elijah comes out of hiding. He's a wanted man, and he shows up in front of Ahab, and he says, "Ahab, here I am. Let's resolve this, and let's see whose God is God. I want you, as king, to gather together all of the prophets of Baal, all of the prophets of Asherah." There's like 900 of them. He says, "Bring them all. I want you to grab all of those prophets, and I want you to bring together all the people of Israel and come to Mount Carmel. And we're going to have a little test to see whose God is God." We're going to have a God off, if you will, and see whose God is God. And Ahab says, "That's a great idea. Let's do that. We're going to finally resolve this and find out whose God is God. I've been leading the people to worship Baal. Let's do it." And so Elijah puts on a huge show. Massive crowds come together on Mount Carmel. I mean, massive crowds. And Elijah says, "Let's have 2 altars. We're going to have an altar for the god of Baal, your God, and we're going to have an altar for my God. And what we're going to do is we're going to have 2 bowls. In fact, I will let you pick out whichever bowl you want because I'm that generous. And we're going to prepare our sacrifices on these altars, and we're going to call on our gods. And whoever's God lights the altar on fire is the one true God." And Ahab's listening to this, and he's like, "Yeah, let's do that. That's a great idea." And so they do it. The prophets of Baal, they prepare their sacrifice, they put together their altar, they build it, and then they start praying to the god of Baal. "Baal, please light this altar on fire." And they're praying really hard. They pray for an hour. They pray for 2 hours. In fact, scripture says that they prayed from early morning until noon. And nothing. The altar didn't light on fire. So what does Elijah do? Being incredibly haughty and somewhat immature, Elijah starts trash talking the prophets of Baal. 900 prophets of Baal there, they're all praying, and he starts trash talking them. He starts saying, "That is so odd. You're calling on Baal and he's not lighting the altar on fire? Maybe he's asleep. Maybe the god of Baal is asleep. Let's wake him, shall we? Baal, oh Baal, come light this altar on fire." And he's making fun of them. In fact, some Hebrew translations of the Bible actually say that he starts saying, maybe Baal is daydreaming on the toilet. Maybe he's actually relieving himself right now. And he's trash talking the prophets of Baal. And of course, the prophets of Baal get really upset. They're angered. They're frustrated. At this point, they're praying harder than they've prayed yet, and they've been praying for hours. They pray hard for even longer. They pray clear up until the evening. And then Elijah says, okay, it's my turn. And he looks over at the altar that he prepared, and he looks at it and he says, you see those 4 big jugs of water over there? Would somebody take those jugs of water and pour them on the altar? And people are like, okay, but if I were going to burn something, I wouldn't soak it in water first. And he says, no, do it. Trust me. And they pour the 4 jugs of water on the altar. And he looks at it and he says, you know what? Let's do that 2 more times. By this point, it's jug after jug after jug of water on this altar. It soaks the entire altar. It soaks all of the wood. It soaks all of the kindling. In fact, they build a giant trench around the altar to catch all of the water, and that trench completely fills up. The altar is completely doused with water. And then finally ready, Elijah prays. And Elijah prays, this is actually 1 Kings 18:36 through 37. At the time of sacrifice, the prophet Elijah stepped forward and he prayed, Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, let it be known today that you are God in Israel, and that I am your servant, and I have done all of these things at your command. Answer me, Lord, answer me, so that these people will know. So that these people will know that you, Lord, are God, and that you are turning their hearts back again. You see, Elijah went through all of this show, and it was a huge show. He went through all of this show, all of this boasting, all of this preparation, because he was driven by faith, because Elijah had a desire for something greater. He desired for the people of Israel to actually turn back to God. And he prayed this prayer, and instantaneously, fire fell and the altar burned. Not only did it burn, it burned the altar. It burned the sacrifice. It burned up all of that soaked wood, all of the soaked kindling. It says that in Scripture that it burned so badly that even the water in the trench was licked up by the flames. And then the people of Israel, they fell prostrate, saying, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. But it's not over. Elijah, there, after putting on this big show and showing the power of God, walks over to King Ahab. Ahab, hey, you should probably go back to Jezreel and go celebrate because it's going to rain. And King Ahab, exhausted, it's been a very long day, and probably very embarrassed of leading the people of Israel to worship a God of rain that didn't actually bring rain. It didn't actually light the altar on fire. Pretty embarrassed. King Ahab says, that's a great idea. I'm going to go back to Jezreel, and I'm going to go celebrate because it's going to rain. A little bit of tail between his legs. So what does Elijah do? He actually goes back up on the mountain, and he begins praying. He gets down on his hands and his knees, and he starts praying for rain. Now imagine this. You're Elijah. You have faith that it's going to rain. In fact, you just put on a huge show. You brought tons of people together. You have now gone and angered and frustrated and upset the king of Israel, and you've promised him that there will be rain. You just made promises in front of a massive crowd of people, of over 1,000 people, saying, it's going to rain. And now you find yourself on all fours on the ground, praying for rain, probably praying really, really hard for rain. He's praying, and he looks over at his servant, and he says, servant, go over. Go over that way. Go look out towards the sea and tell me what you see. And the servant's watching this. He's been there all day, right? And he hears Elijah saying, go out and look towards the sea. And so he runs over and he looks out towards the sea. And this is probably what he was hoping to see or expecting to see. He was probably hoping to see this massive black thundercloud just rolling in, just heavy with water that you can almost see the water in the sky and waiting for it to fall on Israel. The servant runs out, and he's probably hoping to see this, and Elijah's probably hoping that the servant sees this as well. What does the servant actually see? Go to the next slide. This. Far from a thundercloud-filled sky, crystal clear, beautiful blue sky. He sees nothing. Not a cloud in the sky. In my mind, I think about like those old westerns of like the eagle or the hawk that's like, go, go. Like you hear how dry it is. Nothing. And the servant runs back to Elijah and he says, Elijah, there's nothing there. And Elijah says, okay. He gets back down on the ground. Now imagine you're Elijah. You want Israel to have water. You've promised the king. You've made promises. You've put on a big show. There's nothing there. You get down on the ground and you start praying again. You start praying even harder than you were praying earlier. And you send the servant back out. You say, servant, go check again. Go tell me what you see. The servant goes back out, and he still sees this. He comes back, and Elijah gets down on the ground, and he's praying again, even harder. This happens 2 times, 3 times, 4 times. Each time, Elijah praying even harder than the last. This happens 6 times. And the servant comes back on the 6th time, and he's like, Elijah, there is nothing there. Elijah says, okay. And he gets back down on his hands and knees. And he starts praying again. He starts praying for a 7th time. 7 times he's praying. 7 is actually a holy number in Scripture. It shows up in multiple places throughout the Bible. The world was created in 7 days. In fact, some say that the number 7 marks completion or finality. Jesus was asked, Jesus, how many times should I forgive the person who's wronged me? Jesus says 7 times. No, 7 times 77 times. Elisha, a leper came to Elisha saying, I need to be clean. And Elisha sent the person with leprosy down to the Jordan River. He says, go down to the Jordan River and wash yourself 7 times. You'll be clean. And he was. 7 stems on the candelabra in the tabernacle. 7 is a holy number. Elijah gets down on the ground. He's praying for the 7th time. God, please bring this rain. Please bring this rain. And he sends the servant out for the 7th time. Now imagine you're the servant. You've been there all day long. Let's just give ourselves a reminder. It hasn't rained in 3 years. And Elijah just suddenly starts making promises. Israel is scorched. The land is dry. These are the direst of circumstances. You're looking there at your master, and he's on all 4s praying, God, please bring rain. And he's like, go out for the 7th time. Go check it. And the servant goes out. And this time, what does he see? Go to that next slide. He sees this. The world's tiniest steam puff of a cloud. It's actually the size of a hand. And he's looking out over the water, and I imagine this servant going out there and looking out at the water and be like, is it? And looking at it and going, okay. Going back to Elijah. And he says, Elijah, there's a cloud. And it's the size of a man's hand. It's like this big. There's a cloud out there, and it's this big. And Elijah, without missing a beat, he says, go, run and tell Ahab that it's going to rain. Go tell Ahab. And the servant says, Elijah, it's the size of, seriously, it's the size of my hand. And Elijah says, no, go. In fact, I want you to take a chariot. I want you to get to King Ahab before the rain stops you. And the servant's looking at his hand. He's like, the rain's going to stop me. Okay, okay, sure. And he hops in the chariot, and he takes off. And what does Elijah do then? Elijah's excited. He is so thrilled. There's a cloud the size of a man's hand. It's going to rain. He's so thrilled. He actually takes his robe at the time, and he tucks it into his belt. In biblical times, this was huge. Tucking your robe into your belt means you were going to book it. You were going to run, and you were going to run fast. It's something that God told the Israelites to do before they left Egypt. They didn't want to have anything to trip over. They didn't want to have their robes in the way as they were running. So Elijah, excited and thrilled at the cloud of the size of a man's hand, he takes his robe, he tucks it into his belt, and then he starts running. He starts running to Jezreel. In fact, it says the power of the Lord came on him, and he actually outran his servant in the chariot. In fact, he outran the king back to Jezreel. He ran so fast back to the city of Jezreel to tell people it's going to rain, bringing the good news of something that they had been denied for 3 years. And it did. It rained. It rained hard. You see, Elijah was recognized for his faith. I'm going to go to that next slide. He was recognized for his faith and for his prayer, but also for his action. You see, in James chapter 5, verse 17, it actually says, Elijah was a human being, even as we are. He wanted something greater than himself. He had faith. He acted on that faith. He was persistent, and he was just a human. Just a human, just like you and I are, a simple human. In fact, he was a simple trash-talking human who wanted something greater than himself. His faith drove him to be persistent in action. You might say, well, what did he do? He did a lot. He actually showed up in front of the king as a wanted man. Said, here I am. He brought massive crowds together at Mount Carmel. He promised rain that he didn't have to do. He put it all on the line. He prayed not once, not twice, what would have happened if he stopped after the third time? It was just like, that was embarrassing. It's not going to rain. Or what if he had stopped after the fourth time? What would that have done for Israel? Would they have gotten the rain? No, he prayed 7 times. So my question for us are what are we doing today to act out of persistent faith, even in the direst of circumstances, for something that's greater than ourselves? What are we willing to risk? What are we doing this holiday week to keep children out of cages? What deserts are we crossing to leave jugs of water as a sign of hope for those who are seeking something greater? I know we all know how to pray. Whatever you all were thinking about when you were closing your eyes, I know we all know how to pray. 6-year-old, 7-year-old little girl watching that little bobber, praying that it would drop. We all know how to pray. We know how to pray really hard when we want something. My call for us is not only to be sure that we pray hard, but let's act even harder out of that faith. Let's close in a prayer.